My name is Kate O'Connor, and I'm the chair of the Brattleboro Select Board. And on behalf of my fellow select board members and the town staff that is up here with me today, I want to welcome you to our informational town meeting. Before we begin, I want to introduce everybody who's at the table. There's an empty seat here for David Scholes, who is one of our select board members. He's actually at a school board meeting, but he will be here shortly. Brandy Starr is the vice chair of the select board. We have Peter Elwell, our town manager. We have John Allen. And we have Bob Fisher, who is our town attorney. I can tell it's going to be a fun meeting. Before we go into the official program, I'm going to turn it over to Peter to give you some, as we're calling it, late breaking news.
Thank you, Kate. Good evening, everybody. We've got just a couple of announcements. One about the opportunity that we're trying to create for more people to participate in the representative town meeting. And then two updates about projects that we know are of significant magnitude and interest to the members of representative town meeting. And then we'll dive into the substance of what's on the warning this year and what you've come to talk about tonight. So earlier today we issued a news release. Some of you may have seen it, I hope, either directly in the media or else through social media, that there will be childcare offered for this year's representative town meeting. That's something that the body asked for last year, that this be explored. You had a couple of your members who did look into that. Tom Green and Maya Hasagawa were representing the body in looking into this and working together with us, town government, and with the school system. And the details of this are coming together very much at the last minute, so we aren't sure that we necessarily reached a broad enough audience today to have drawn folks out who might otherwise have felt like they weren't going to be able to participate. But we do hope that as the word gets around town, and we'd ask all of you to help us spread that word, that people who do need care for their children on town meeting day, who would really like to participate in the meeting, might be encouraged to come either next Wednesday night to the information meeting for the school district at Oak Grove School at 6:30 next Wednesday, or even just early at 8 o'clock in the morning on the day of town meeting when you caucus again. So there's two more opportunities for folks to fill those empty slots, and we hope that the child care will be helpful for them. In addition, for any of you who have young children and need to have help of this kind for that day, the location will be there at BAMS. It'll be a room on the same site as the meeting. It'll be available from 8 o'clock in the morning until the meeting ends, but not during the lunch break. People will be asked to come and pick up their kids for the lunch break, and then they'll be covered again in the afternoon. The age range will be 4 to 13. We ask that nobody who's still in diapers participate. Eventually, we may be able to offer broader childcare, but again, for this first time to kind of test and see how it goes, we're trying to make sure that it's a manageable group for the folks who are going to be supervising. And the supervision will be provided by certified teachers, paraprofessionals, or substitute teachers who work for the school district, along with, they'll be assisted by teenagers who are getting community service credits for the time that they help out in the room. And the eligibility is being defined as any child or ward of town meeting representatives, as well as town or school administrators, board members, or staff members who are required to be at representative town meeting. So again, a step forward in terms of trying to make sure that we reduce and eliminate any barriers that we can for participation from the community. The other two things that I wanted to offer quick updates about are the police fire facilities project, which is just concluded, and the municipal center project, which we hope to begin someday. The police fire project ended very successfully after 17 months of construction. The $12.8 million that you authorized to be spent for the on the project, we came in $300,000 under that with the completion of the three facilities, which leaves a question then for a future representative town meeting as to the appropriate use of those funds. We'll be soon holding a meeting of the Police Fire Facilities Building Committee, the final meeting of that committee, to come together and review the end of the project and the potential uses of these funds. There are a couple of things that were not included within the base construction project because we were concerned that there might not be enough money. So we wanted to make sure we got to the end of the job, completed everything that needed to be completed, and then if there were still some funds available, we could address these questions. So we will be addressing that with the advisory committee, and then their recommendation will come to the select board for review, and the select board will make a recommendation for consideration at a future representative town meeting. That could be possibly, depending on the circumstances, either later in the year we might ask for a special representative town meeting, or maybe a year from now at the 2019 town meeting. The reason why there might be a special meeting relates to the update I'll provide in a moment about the municipal center. The one last thing about the police fire project is, while we stayed under budget for the $12.8 million total cost of the three buildings together, the two fire stations and the police station, there was a separate $4.5 million cap on the police station component of this. We didn't overexpend that, but we got to the point where, in order to not exceed that, we had one bill we needed to pay from the town's capital fund, or we would have gone over the authority that you provided us. So the $300,000 is a real $300,000. It's net of a $64,000 bill that we've paid from capital, and we will be asking you at that next town meeting, whether it's going to be a special one during the year or whether it's going to be a year from now, we'll ask you to ratify that that money actually can be spent against the bonds, since it was for the dispatch center work at the police station that serves both the police department and the fire department. So we're not considering that $64,000 to be available. We're considering that to be money in the project until such time as you advise us that it's not. We'll be back to you to visit that question. And finally, on the municipal center, October 17th last year, the select board approved a letter of intent that the state of Vermont had provided us regarding its desire to rent 10,000 square feet at the municipal center, and we were very excited that it was moving forward, not as quickly as we had once hoped, but substantively on the scale that we had expected. And we've, in working to get that letter of intent turned into an actual lease, we've run into some additional issues that we need to resolve with the state. So the conversation is still very much alive, but is still moving very slowly. We'll be back with details as soon as we're able to share details. I don't know at this point whether what the scale of the project will be. It's likely to be smaller than the 10,000 square feet that was identified in the letter of intent, but we're working through what is the scale that is going to work for the state and work for the town, be affordable for both of us. When we've got that put together, we'll be back to address it with the select board and eventually come back to offer a recommendation to representative town meeting.
Thank you, Peter. Before I get into an overview of the budget, if this is your first informational meeting, I want to welcome you. And the purpose of the meeting tonight is for us to really give you an overview of the budget that we have put together as a select board. And it's an opportunity for you folks to ask us any questions. The debate and discussion and decisions are actually made at town meeting, which is, as you all know, Saturday, March 24th. So ask away the questions, and but the big debate and all the decisions you're going to make are going to be on that Saturday. What I'm going to do is just walk you through the budget. It's more of an overview as opposed to line by line. And once I'm done, we are happy to answer as many questions as we can. What we want to do is make sure everybody understands the budget that we've proposed. And after I'm done, I'm going to ask my fellow select board members if they want to say anything. We've met, I guess it was over 9 meetings, I believe it was, where we met and went over the budget. And what I wanted to say to Peter and the rest of the town staff, we could not have put this budget together without them. And I want to thank them publicly in front of all of you tonight. We're very lucky to have the town staff that we have. They're very diligent, and as you see when you go through the budget, they've done everything they can to keep the expenses as low as possible. One of the important things that was for us as a select board was to increase taxes as small as possible. What we've heard over and over again is that taxes are too high in our town. We've taken that to heart, and that's the budget we've tried to propose to you right now, is what we've heard from all of you. Everybody has their yellow book, and if you turn to page 74 and 75, you'll see the budget summary, and you'll note that the total revenues and expenditures are $17,575,915. That figure is an increase of $82,074, or 0.5% over the budget that was adopted in 2018. So as you can see, it's actually a very, very small increase. The budget that we're proposing would require an increase in property taxes from the FY18 number that was $14,277,946. It would increase to $14,000, I wish that was what it was, $14,696,643, which is a $418,697 increase from the 2018 property taxes. And that's a 2.93% increase. And if you look at page 74, that's on the very, very top line, has that information. If you're looking for what that actually means for your tax rate, it's going to be a 3% increase in taxes, which means an increase over FY18 of $36 for each $100,000 of property value. So that's what we're proposing with this budget. We tried to keep it as low as possible. So that's the overall sort of brief of the budget. If you look at page 70 and 71, there's two charts that outline what our revenues and expenses are. If you look at page 70, you see the revenues. And I won't go through each one unless anyone wants me to, but if you note the percent of change category, which is the very last column, you see that we've tried as little as possible to increase those numbers. Actually, we've tried hard not to increase the property tax number. You'll note that rooms and meals we're projecting a small increase in the rooms and meals. The transfer from other funds, what that is transfer that goes from the parking or utility funds into the general fund budget. And that happens because there are some things that, whether it's operators or support, the administrative support that goes into running the parking fund, we move that over so that it's paid for by the parking fund and not by the general fund. We're going to talk about use of fund balance, which is the $770,000 number. That's the rainy day fund, but we'll talk about that more in general. And then there's other revenue, which doesn't fit in any category, and if anybody has any questions about that, we can go through that. If you look on page 71, it's the expenditures, and obviously this is the important page. And again, if you look at the percent of changes, you'll notice it's very, very small. Some of the changes, as in staffing, there's a lot of things that you can't do without. There is an increase in, we're going to talk about a new human resource personnel for the town, and we'll get into that. Employee benefits, that's, health insurance and vacations and everything that, that's all negotiated. So that's why that's a figure that's at 2.22%, which is actually a relatively small amount. Risk management deals with property, liability, and workers' comp, and obviously all that insurance goes up, and that's really out of our control, but if you have any questions about that, the town manager can talk about that. You'll notice the human services budget, which is something we're going to also talk about. We're proposing a 21% increase in that, which we will again talk about that. The transfer to the solid waste budget, what we're doing there is we're transferring general fund dollars into the solid waste budget. It's a good thing and a bad thing all at the same time. There's not enough money in the solid waste fund to cover the expenses. The expenses now are covered by bag sales. And because everybody is doing such a good job recycling, we're not getting as much income from the bag sales. So we have to use some general fund money to cover the cost of the solid waste. So it's a good thing and a bad thing all at the same time. We're going to talk more about the transfer to the capital projects and the capital equipment. We'll get into that at a later in the presentation here. The debt service, that deals with the borrowing that we've had with the police fire, and that's going down as you pay off. And other, again, that's anything that doesn't fit into other categories, and we can talk about that if anybody has any questions. There's a couple of things that, or several things that we are proposing that have not been in the budgets before. Pretty much everything you see in the 2019 budget really reflects what was in the FY 2018 budget, except a few items, and I'm going to read them now, but then we're going to go over them separately. We're proposing $60,000 for a human resources professional position. The human services budget is, we're proposing that it be increased by $26,000. It would go from a traditional $120,000 to $146,000. We're proposing spending $20,000 for the skate park, make a contribution to that. $10,000 for training for diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that came out of the discussion we had at numerous select board meetings that dealt with diversity in town government, and we made a commitment to that, and we want to put some money into training town staff. We had a request from the Southern Vermont Watershed Alliance for a contribution for $1,000, so that is in the budget. There's also a $300 contribution to Green Up Day. We're going to go through some of these separately. I want you to turn, if you turn to page 95, you'll see our capital budget. And what we're proposing, if you look at the last line, it says transfer from general fund. We're proposing transferring $1,575,000 from the general fund budget to use for capital projects and equipment. And as you'll see here, the first line, the first four lines have the projects that we want, which include street paving, sidewalk repair, skating rink, energy savings. For the last few years, we've been putting money into energy efficiency projects in town, and this is one of them. As well as the Gibson-Aiken roof and insulation project. That's another one that will help with the energy efficiency in the Gibson-Aiken Center. The vehicles and equipment, computer hardware. We've tried to make what was an antiquated IT system has now been upgraded, so we got to keep that going. We want to replace the 1993 ladder truck, and that's a discussion we're going to have more about in a minute. A vehicle for the police department, a new Chevy Suburban, and 2 other Chevy Impalas that the police department wants to replace. A pickup truck, half-ton pickup truck. An excavator for the Department of Public Works, a dump truck for the Department of Public Works, and a pickup truck for the Department of Public Works. And as you'll see, that adds up to $2,075,000. And when we get into the ladder truck, you'll hear more about this, but what we're proposing is to not pay or not use cash for the entire $950,000 purchase of the fire truck. What we'd like to do is borrow $500,000, which makes the transfer of money from the general fund to the capital fund, $1,575,000. And we'll go through all this in more detail on these other projects. One of the things that we're proposing is to use money. There's a line item that I showed you that talked about, it was on page 70 in the revenues. It says use of fund balance to the tune of $770,000. The fund balance is more easily known as our surplus funds. And for years now, what we do is we put whatever surplus funds we have, we put in the unassigned fund balance. We can obviously use it however town meeting lets us use it. There is a guideline over the years in town that we've kept kept 10% of the town expenditures of budget in the rainy day funds. You never go lower. The unassigned fund balance or rainy day fund balance as of June 20th, 2017, which was the end of the fiscal year FY17, was $2,454,139. The 10% guideline would bring that, we'd have to have $1,745,723 left in the fund, which would give us $699,416 to use to spend now if we wanted to keep that 10%. We're, as you can tell, we're going above that, and we're asking to spend $770,000, which is obviously above the $699 that the 10% would allow us to use. And I'll read off what we want to use that money for. And again, we're going to talk about some of these individually because they're in the budget separately. What we want to do is use $450,000 of the surplus funds towards the purchase of the ladder truck. We want to use $20,000 for a contribution to the skate park fund, $150,000 towards an excavator for Public Works Department, and then $115,000 for the roofing and installation project at the Gibson Aiken Center, which I just referenced, and $35,000 for a pickup truck for the maintenance department. So one of the decisions that you folks are going to have to make at town meeting is if you're comfortable going under that 10% guideline that we've always tried to maintain. Using the $770,000 would just drop us down to having 9.6% left in the rainy day fund. So we're not trying to go too extreme, we're trying to be moderate, but we think it's a better place to be. And when we get into the discussion about the aerial ladder truck, I think that will, you'll see why we're recommending what we're recommending. And with that, we're going to save questions to the end if that's okay. That's the general overview of the budget. When you look at the articles that we're going to be discussing, some of them are pulled out of, there's not a general budget discussion, you're going to be voting on certain things separately, and one of those is the aerial ladder truck. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the select board is recommending, and then I'm going to ask Chief Bacassi to explain why the fire department is asking for this truck. The truck they need to replace the truck because pretty much the ladder is broken. In October, the select board authorized the purchase of a used ladder truck from Walpole, New Hampshire, and it cost $35,000. What? Oh, Sharon, Mass, I'm sorry. There must have been, we did something in Walpole, I don't know what it was. So it was from Sharon, Mass, a $35,000 ladder truck. to basically tide us over so we can make a decision about the major purchase. The estimated cost of the truck is $950,000. What we're proposing is taking out a bond or borrowing $500,000 of that and using $450,000 from the surplus funds. That's going to require $15,000 from the debt service for FY19, and subsequently for the next 10 years it'll be $60,000 in debt service. And what I want to do, I think at this point we'll have Chief Bacassi come up and then we can explain more of the articles, if that makes sense. Is the chief here? Yes, he is.
So more or less laid out how we got here. Our 1991 aerial was sent out for repairs, and it was found that the repair cost far outweighed the value of the truck. So basically it turned into scrap metal. We were lucky enough to come across a used aerial down in Sharon, Mass, which was bought with the intentions of bridging this gap until we get to town meeting to ask for the purchase of a new aerial. I think it's important at this point to remind all of you that the aerial was in last year's budget. So, and Peter, please help me out here if I misstate this. The amount in the budget was reduced to an amount that would be a match on a grant that we put in with the federal government in hopes of receiving funding for that aerial ladder. We weren't successful with that funding, so we're now in the second year, if you will, of a scheduled replacement of this truck. Some of the questions that I've been asked, and I'll just briefly go over them very quickly, is, was this due to the lack of maintenance? No, this was not due to the lack of maintenance. This truck was a 1991 aerial that has served the town very well. As you know, it's worked at two major Main Street fires, the Wilder Block and the Brooks House, as well as numerous other fires in town and rescues in town. And I think that's important to remember also, is that an aerial ladder is not just for fires. We also use it for rescue work, whether it be water rescue, ice rescue, rescue from heights. The issues that were found to be with that ladder, the 1991 ladder, were things that we couldn't see. There were rungs on the aerial that were rusting from the inside out. There were problems with the torque box, other things like that. We're asking for this aerial this year, again, because this is actually the second year out on the replacement schedule. I can't stand here and tell you whether the aerial that we have today will last 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, because we have no history with it. We have the basic maintenance records, but no real history with it. Right now I'm sitting on a $4,000 repair quote for this truck that I'm trying to make last until July until we get into a new budget year. And I think it's important to remember that this truck, though it's newer than the one that we took out of service, it's still 24 years old. It's a 1994 ladder truck that's 24 years old. It has 12,800 miles on it, 2,300 engine hours. And I had an interesting conversation just prior to this meeting. You take the engine hours and the conversion rate, which I was just informed of, They say for every hour that the engine runs is equal to 40 miles of road time. So we're looking at 92,000 miles that is on this aerial engine-wise and component-wise. The worst thing for a fire chief in a town like this is not to have an aerial ladder. It scares me, it concerns me, and I can speak for Assistant Chief Howard, I know it concerns him. The reasons that we ask you not to put off the purchase of this truck for another year are many in my mind, and just to name a few. Again, the unknowns of this truck that we presently have. We don't know what we're going to get for service out of this truck. History shows that an annual increase on fire trucks is anywhere from 3 to 5%. So we're looking at roughly another $38,000 in increase for the splatter truck if it's put out another year. If there's any borrowing done next year, I'm sure we're looking at interest rate increases, maintenance costs to this present aerial. Again, I don't know what we're going to put into this. Loss of value in this present ladder truck. We feel as though that we can get pretty close to what we paid for this truck in either a trade-in or selling it to another town, a smaller town than us. One of the big things that we have to look at, you have to consider is we can't go to a lot and buy a fire truck. We build it from the ground up. We spec every component in that truck. We work with a dealer to make sure that everything that we want for this truck in town, that's built for this town. We're prepared to go out. Our spec is done. So we're ready to go forward if this truck is approved at town meeting. The big wait then is build and delivery time is about 1 year. So we won't see this truck until June or July of next year. So if it's postponed for another year, we're looking at 2 years before we take delivery of this truck. And that's really stretching it. And then the final reason we have for asking that it's not postponed is that we have other trucks that are due for replacement in the capital budget that are coming up behind this. One of them is 2 years out, and if this ladder truck is postponed, we're now stacking trucks in the capital budget, which is not good for, for the taxpayers or for the way we do our budget. We try to build a capital budget so we spread this stuff out. And I think with that, that's all I have. If anybody's got any questions, I'm glad to answer.
Yeah. First, I want to just explain to people why we have split it up, and it's 2 separate articles. If you look at page 7 in the booklet, Article 11 is asking for approval to borrow the money, and it's going to be done by Australian ballot. There will be debate on the floor, but you'll go and fill out a ballot, and the reason it has to be done that way, it's because it's a 10-year note, so we have to get approval that way. And then Article 12 is the article asking for approval or to approve the $450,000 from the surplus funds to be used to purchase the fire truck. The one really overriding reason that we wanted to do, we've structured it a bond and surplus money, is because we didn't want to, if we put $950,000 in general fund money, that would make the tax rate go up. We didn't want to spend too much out of the surplus, because as you can see, there are other items that we needed to use surplus funds for. So we thought it was a balance to do it the way we did, and obviously that's up to town meeting to decide. But there was a rationale for how we got to where we got with how we divided that $950,000 up. Did We can do that. We can take, before we go on to the other things, we can take questions about the fire truck, but obviously if you think of a question later, you can ask it.
Let's see if this works. Does this work? Can anybody hear me if I use this microphone? All right.
Oh, wait.
Hates.
Does it work?
It will.
What about now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for Chief Bacassi, if you want to come forward again. This is a clarifying question for something that you said at one of the meetings. I believe you said something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, along the lines of, this ladder truck doesn't have a tank,
Right.
a water tank, which means that anytime we would need this ladder truck, we would need 2 trucks, correct?
That's right.
And there's also a challenge of bringing 2 trucks on site, meaning if the tank truck came first and dropped hose, it's challenging to then drive in the ladder truck while things are already in place. Am I correct in saying that?
Clarify which one, you mean the ladder truck from,
The ladder truck that we currently have from
Right.
Sharon.
Yeah, so the ladder truck, we've always had, shouldn't say always.
That's fine.
The 1991 ladder truck that we had a water tank and a pump on it. Back in the 80s, the mutual aid agreement was that we would always run an engine with a ladder truck because ladder trucks back then didn't have water tanks or pumps on them now. Now, when communities feel as though that they're an asset to the municipality, they're spec'd that way. So we've spec'd the 91 truck, what I call the 91 truck, with a pump and a tank, so it was a single resource. It didn't need to be supported by an engine. If a mutual aid town asked for a ladder truck, we were sending 2 trucks. We were sending the ladder truck and an engine. Now we only have to send 1. The other advantage of having a pump and a tank on it is that some of you that have been town meeting members for a while will remember, I'll take a stab at this, 7 or 8 years ago, we reduced our fleet by 1 engine. When we get busy and all of our engines are being used at different calls, we can now run the ladder truck the way we spec it as an engine, because it's got the water, it's got the hose, it's got the pump, which helps us to keep down the number of trucks we have in our fleet. Basically, it serves a dual role when we need it to run that way.
Thank you for clarifying that. So if we stayed with the Sharon ladder truck for longer, we would go longer without having a truck that we would build to spec, and what we would build to spec would have the pump, the tank, and the ladder in one vehicle.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
it's hard to see. Oh, Spoon? Yeah, please come up. And when you come up, introduce yourself and tell us what district you're from. Thank you.
Spoon, actually I have my seat through the school board, but I'm in 3. I feel like you sort of misstated or the cost of the truck. You said that if we borrowed money, it would not raise taxes. In fact, it raises taxes even more, because not only do we pay for the truck, but we pay for the interest. And so what's rather than simply raising the taxes 3 or 4 more cents this year, what we do is raise the taxes over a 10-year period a little bit more than what we would be paying if we just did it in a 1-year shot. My recommendation, of course, is to just raise the taxes, the 3 or 4 or 5 cents, whatever it is, pay for the whole thing in cash, and not increase the town's debt. I think that debt is always a large number, and I don't think people really understand. If you look at your book, as we did, we're paying right now $1.4 million a year servicing debt because we refuse to save money to buy things in cash or to charge ourselves. And you have to scratch your head. It's not, a certain amount of debt may be appropriate. We have what looks like about 8% now, a little bit more. That's not terrible. It's not low. It'd be much nicer if the debt rate was about 4% instead of 8%. But I feel like the select board is misconstruing what saves people money. We're not saving money when we keep borrowing and adding interest payments to our taxes. It's an illusion. And in fact, when you're paying $1.4 million a year in taxes, that's like 10 cents or something. I don't know. I guess that's 8% of the budget. Think of your taxes for the whole year that you pay on a $200,000 house and see what 8% of that is. So as a homeowner, you paid a pretty big chunk of your money just servicing debt. So it really doesn't make sense. We're just trying to con ourselves into thinking it's cheaper to buy things on time. And all of you should be thinking about credit cards, installments, and et cetera, and whether this notion of debt is a good thing. Besides for that, well, I want to say two other things. What raises this even to an even higher level of insanity is that last year you sat here and you gave back to the taxpayers $1.1 million of their savings, only to turn around the very next year and borrow $500,000 from a bank, which is what you gave back to the taxpayers last year. I just don't, it's just hard to fathom why these things get done. The last thing I want to talk about is the fact that as time goes on, looking at our capital plan, it's running 1.8, 1.9, 2 million a year. Then I see in 4 or 5 years, it hits over 3 million. That's the time that we will need some surplus. And we're not going to build as much of a surplus if we keep on increasing debt payments every year. So I strongly urge you to support the idea of paying for this entirely in cash in 1 year through taxes and allowing us to get our debt and our taxes under better control and to plan our capital expenses much better. It'll make financial planning a lot easier if there's less debt.
Thank you. Let me just clarify a couple of things. I did not say, or if I didn't say it clearly, I apologize. I did not say that buying this fire truck with the cash was not going to increase taxes. And I'll repeat that if we take out a $500,000 bond, it is going to require, it's going to have a $15,000 debt payment in FY19 and $60,000 for the next 10 years after that. What I meant to say, if I didn't say it this way, is that we would have to increase taxes if we spend the entire $915,000 in cash. That's why we want to do it $500,000 in borrowing and $450,000 in cash. If we spent the $950,000 in cash, the tax increase on top of, right now it's 3.6 cents. If we spend the $950,000 in cash, you got to add another 4.347 cents onto that 3.6 cents. So if somebody wants to do the math, it's about an 8-cent, I believe, tax increase for FY19. That's why the select board, as a board, we're recommending borrowing and using the unassigned fund balance, so that wouldn't be an 8-cent increase on our property taxes. Oh, tell me, yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to just add one more thing for perspective, that the basic principle that we should borrow only when we really must, that borrowing for convenience is not a wise practice and will burden future budgets, is correct. And because of that, we've actually weaned ourselves off of the practice of borrowing for smaller items, like replacing police cars or pickup trucks or those sorts of things, and that we've sometimes had borrowed money for in the past. One of the reasons why the debt service number from last fiscal year to this fiscal year is decreasing is because one of those notes that was a short-term note to do that kind of borrowing for the fleet has actually been retired this year. And because we've now not been buying vehicles that way, we're reaping the benefit of that. So we think the basic principle is correct, that as often as possible we should be replacing vehicles and equipment with cash, whether that's cash from taxes or cash from fund balance, will depend on any given year and where we stand, but not to borrow for those smaller pieces that are more affordable. Every now and then we're going to face a more daunting investment like $1 million or nearly $1 million for a fire truck. And so in that context, we look both for ways to try to make the price as, you can call it low as possible, and actually reduce last year's $1 million ask to $950,000 for this year, and did the split recommendation for partial use of cash and partial borrowing that Ms. O'Connor has described.
Yes, Mr. Esteve. Yeah, go over there and introduce yourself to the crowd.
My name is Wayne Esty. I'm from the 3rd District. One thing I'd like to say is the interest payment is $615,000, which makes the total cost of the fire truck $1.5 million. If we do it $950,000, and if you borrow the interest payment, would make it how much?
So the payments that Chair O'Connor described.
$115,000, my math.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I want to make it clear that it included both the principal and the interest, so it's $115,000 worth of interest.
Thank you, and thank you. And I did not catch all of the fire chief's discussion about what the price increase of trucks would be if it went up, if we waited till next year, saved this year and waited till next year.
We estimate $38,000 of price increase over the year based on the recent trends in inflation for those types of vehicles.
So my question would be is if we can save 900 or what amounts to $1 million for next year and pay cash at that point and save ourselves the interest we would have spent on the debt. Sounds like your cost $35,000 more to buy it next year, saving this year and avoiding $115,000 by borrowing this year.
Does anyone else have any questions about the fire truck? Yes, Mr. Carver.
George Carville, District 1, I favor buying a fire truck, but I have some questions. You mentioned that in last year's budget, there was about half this amount because we were hoping for a matching grant. Did I hear that correctly? So my question is, if we raised that last year and didn't spend it, what happened to it? That's my first question. I'll give them both. And the other question is, we've got some surplus for the police fire construction. Can any of that be used for the fire truck?
The answer to your second question is yes. Subject to, it can't be used at this town meeting. It can't be authorized at this town meeting, but it could be authorized at a future town meeting when it's properly warned to be redirected towards this purchase. And that's what I talked about earlier, that there's actually some additional needs at the facilities that we'd like to identify and have considered by the committee and the board and ultimately town meeting, and then it may be the judgment anywhere along that path that a better use of that for capital purposes. It'll have to be spent as a capital investment, but it can be reauthorized by town meeting. So the answer to that is yes. The answer to there was only $50,000, it wasn't half. And that's one of the reasons why we think we didn't get the grant, is we were asking for $950,000 grant against a $50,000 match for what we at that time were estimating was going to be $1 million truck. And so in the application that we filed for going into that same program, hoping to at least get some funding assistance for this, we've actually done it as a 50-50 match this year. So $475,000 from the town and $475,000 from the grant if we were fortunate enough to get it. The $50,000 is in the capital fund balance. Again, only subject to being spent for purposes that represented town meeting authorized.
Terry.
Harry Carter, District 3. Kate, I'm sorry, what page was the budget for town vehicles that you just...
Oh, it was on the capital, it's page 95.
Yeah, I understand this will be up for debate, but just for the record, I think Mike made an excellent case. A 1993 truck and a broken ladder, and yeah, obviously. However, and well-deserved, the fire department, the fire stations have gotten a lot of funding this year for their stations and renovations, which was long overdue, and I applaud it. And based on what he just said, I understand the priority. However, I just want, for the record, I understand this isn't up for debate now, but just for the record, there's a number of vehicles with the police and the road department and the fire department, vehicles that are also up, and it has been pointed out, I believe, on several occasions. I wasn't present, but we have one sidewalk cleaner plow, and we used to have two, and apparently the one we do have belongs in a museum. And
We actually used to have three.
yeah, and they're essential for the safety of, people that walk, and I just can't imagine, I mean, it would be great if somewhere within this budget, something could be sacrificed for a year or two, just so at least we could get one new one. And I understand this will be up for debate, but I just wanted this on record and to inform the public about this.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the snowplow later at this meeting, too.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
okay, sorry, thank you.
No, that's okay. Yes, Mr. Davis.
Andy Davis, District 3. I'll be brief. Over the last several years, we've had this discussion about the percentage of the budget that should be in the rainy day fund or the unassigned, and that's been a target. And we've argued against, using that in lieu of taxes in order to keep it at a certain level. Is there a similar number for the amount of debt that we're paying against the budget? I mean, I'm trying to respond to Spoon's, Agave's concern that we not just say, well, we can add a few more dollars of debt. I mean, let's try to be as scientific about our debt as we have been about the unassigned fund balance, and use a real guideline, because I know that part of why families borrow money is to spread out costs, and I think that's legitimate. But we also get into a trap in this culture of using debt to get something faster. and that becomes a hole that we dig deeper and deeper. So I would just like to see a real suggested hard number that Spoon made reference to how that debt looks like it could be going up over the next bunch of years, and that's a concern. Thank you.
There isn't one hard and fast number. We'll be happy to speak to that, provide some context for that at the town meeting when you're having your discussion about this. There certainly is more than one proper way to make this large investment that we all need to make. So we'll be prepared to answer that question better 10 days from now.
Our new town meeting, Brad.
My name is Mike Hoffman, District 1. Okay, I think I have two questions. One is, am I understanding correctly that we agree that the fire engine is important and now we're just trying to figure out how to pay for it? Or is it whether or not, is there merit in that? Is there?
On the select board's point of view, we think the fire truck is important. It's a ladder truck that's broken. So we think it's a good thing to invest in. It's up to you folks to decide whether you agree with us. There was a debate on the select board. We've spent a lot of time talking about this, whether this purchase could wait until next year. And we decided that we thought we needed to go forward now. But so it really is up to
So that's still,
town meeting. But we think it's the right thing to do. And so there are two things, whether you folks think it's the right thing to do and whether you want to fund it the way that we have outlined funding it.
it would seem like investing in a first quality fire engine for a first quality town or village is essential as a proactive thing. But anyway, second thing is, I looked here, just as much concern for debt. It looked like on the, if I understand this correctly, on the investment income, there's a pretty large surplus, working surplus, but there's like no investment income. And it would be nice to be able to offset some of the costs of the debt proactively or intelligently. It only looks like there's $7,000 in investment income for the last year, which is remarkably low compared to all the debt. What's that? 111?
That's a right on point observation, and we've recently changed how we invest those funds because they weren't yielding nearly enough income for the town given the magnitude of our fund balance. So we've taken $5 million and put it into an account that is still liquid but pays a much higher interest rate, and we expect, I don't remember the exact figure, maybe John does, and that's it, I think, yeah.
What was the loss?
Pardon?
What was the income?
Actually,
Just on page 111, down in the middle, investment income lost by $5,110, which is astonishing.
so you're in the audit, and I'll ask John to step up and speak to that, but in the budget, we can speak to the investment question that you raised or point you made, which is, there it is. We're forecasting $42,000 worth of investment income this year compared to $6 in last year's budget. We expect we'll actually yield better than that, but obviously that depends on the changing in rates.
$5 million.
I'm sorry?
That's on $5 million.
Yes, that's correct.
$42,000.
$42,000.
Even that would allow us to borrow less.
On the fire truck, just for some clarification, so Kate, you said it was broken, but I understand we got another old one in to replace the broken one. So we got one that the fire department's not real comfortable with, but it's better than what we had. Needs $4,000 investment, but, I mean, could we actually make do with that one for a few years and, you know, and try to save the money?
I want to suggest that any of you who haven't yet reviewed your Finance Committee's report to Representative Town Meeting, there's a really good analysis in there that describes that you know, the vehicle is needed. There are a number of different ways in which it could be purchased, and that the decision that you, as Representative Town Meeting, will make will depend largely on your appetite for risk. So there are ways in which to get greater certainty that will cost, you know, would accelerate the purchase, would involve the borrowing, or Mr. Regate's alternative of a larger tax increase this year in order to pay cash this year. Or we could do this over you know, a longer period of time, push back the purchase, save money, save up for this by putting money aside this year, and then perhaps having enough money next year to buy the vehicle with cash then. But there's, you know, the risk that you're incurring, and your own Finance Committee did a really nice job, I thought, of framing that question, that there's not a right or a wrong. It's going to be the collective level of comfort that you have with taking additional risk in order to be able to wait and buy it with cash if that's where you land.
Nancy Anderson. 2 questions. If you recall, Mike said that it takes a year to build the fire truck. So if you don't buy it this year, you're going to have to wait 2 years for a fire truck. And we can't, I don't believe we sitting in this room have any idea of the risk that we're putting ourselves into for major fires. Plus the fact that we can't help another town if we don't have a properly functioning truck. So, and it goes both ways. That we use other towns' trucks, but we would never have our hotel if we had not had a good ladder truck, or several. So I don't believe that any of us would be comfortable making that risk. It seems to me that the fire people have to make that decision for us. The other question I have is when you talk about the investments, your low percentage that you're making on it, I didn't hear much how much you had invested. What was it?
$5 million.
And you're only making $6,000 this year.
No, that was, the $7,000 that's in the budget was prior to us investing the $5 million.
That's correct.
So what is your percentage that you're allowed as a municipality to invest? What are your risks? Is it 60-40, 80-20?
No. So, yeah, that's a really important point. Thanks for asking that question. This isn't like an investment portfolio where you are going to have an asset allocation to, you know, make sure you have diverse investments and spread out your risk. This is the cash that is the savings account that has accumulated from the taxes that the people of the town have paid. And we can't risk any of the principal. So that's why even when we, you know, get into a money market account and sort of push it towards the highest interest we can gain as opposed to just sitting in something, you know, less rewarding than that, we still don't make the kind of money that the household might make when it's willing to take some risk and have a portfolio.
Well, that was my question. Because it's a municipality, you can't take risk at all.
I'm sorry?
You can't take risk at all if you're investing. And so it's sort of a moot point, but whatever you did, I'm very appreciative that you did it because you're going to make 0.5% in your bank.
Right. Exactly.
You're not going to make any money. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dora?
Dora Bubalis, District 3. Not to sound like a broken record, because they say this every year. I'm listening to a lot of argument and discussion, and I'm not listening to a lot of questions. And when we get into town meeting, many of the people who are doing this are going to sit in the meeting like boobs and not say anything. So let's save the argument and the statements for actual town meeting, because we're going to be here all night. We've been like a half an hour on this one subject in which, you know, in which only a few were actual questions that could be answered. And now we're into general fund questions, which we said we were going to hold off so that we could have the full overview. So if people don't have more questions about the fire truck, let's move on, let's get the overview, because I know there's people that have general fund questions.
Per Dora, does anyone have any more questions on the fire truck? Yes, Mr. Chapman.
It's kind of a technical question that I have. My name is Chris Chapman, District 1. We've heard about the questions about cost versus benefit, interest versus taxing to pay cash. I have a question about what really has the town government determined is really the optimum amount to borrow to reduce the amount that goes to taxes in a given year, but also reduce to the greatest extent the interest that's payable. Another question I have is whether the town manager's office has an idea of how our individual fire insurance rates are affected by the quality of the firefighting equipment. And my third question is if I were to vote for this fire truck, which sounds like quite a big rig, could I have a ride on it?
The third answer, or the answer to the third question is no. Sorry. We have lawyers and insurance companies. And the answer to the second question is the ISO rating won't be affected by a particular decision in a particular year, but if the decision was to let this vehicle fail and not replace it, it could have a significant effect. So we're rated based on our fleet. A younger fleet is going to be rated better, but our rating right now is based on when we had the 1991 ladder truck. So we think the prudent thing to do is replace it and replace it now. If the decision was made not to replace it this year, it needs to be replaced soon. And the reason that the select board has weighed everything you're talking about tonight, and we'll talk about again on the 24th, and come to the decision that we should bite the bullet and do it this year, is because it is an essential piece of equipment for protecting the community, and it's not going to get any less expensive. So, and then on your question about the balancing of how much to pay with cash and how much to borrow, it wasn't driven by any kind of formula that says, what's a prudent balancing act there. It was driven by how much cash we have available. So we wanted to pay as much cash as possible for this purchase so as to avoid the interest. But even by putting the $450,000 in that's recommended, we dipped slightly below the 10% standard to 9.6. We felt like for such a purchase of such significance that comes along so rarely, that 1 year of going just slightly below 10 is not an irresponsible act. But to go, to not borrow the $500,000 and take that down to less than 5% would be an irresponsible act.
Anyone else? Yes, Arlene.
Arlene Disler, District 2. Do we know what we would get for the old fire truck? And is the cost that we're looking at taking into consideration? but it would bring,
No, I think, yeah, I think the chief was hoping, we paid 35,000 for it, and I think the chief was hoping we could get 35, but we're not 100% sure. If I'm wrong, the chief can wave and tell me I'm wrong, but the hope is it wouldn't be more than 35.
No, we'll get very close to what we paid for.
Yeah, which is 35,000. And the answer is no. I mean, the 35,000 that we might get is not factored into the 950 that we're paying.
But it would be, it would offset, it would go to general revenue, and so it would be part of the discussion next year for fund balance, so that the, it would reduce the net impact for this budget from the 450 to 415, if we got $35,000 for the vehicle.
thank you.
Welcome. Yes, Mr. Tewksbury.
Kip Tewksbury, District 2. Since we're talking about fund balances or whatever, I didn't hear you answer Spoon's comment about previous years returning some fund balance to the taxpayers, and then this year apparently needing to borrow money because there's not enough in the fund balance. Could you explain those decisions and how it brings us to where we are in terms of fund balance, please?
You can take it, then I'll mention something after.
Okay.
I'll talk about it.
So it is correct that we used more fund balance last year than we're recommending to use this year. It was not a measure of tax relief. It was you'll notice that the recommended capital transfer is also down substantially this year. So what we really are trying hard to adhere to, some years better than others, but most years quite well, is to use the accumulated fund balance only for capital purchases, so that we're not relying on it to any degree as part of our operating budget. We're getting closer and closer to funding $1 million a year of capital investment with real-time current revenues. We started 4 years ago at $315,000, and we're up to over $800,000 in the proposed budget this year. So we're working our way in the right direction. There are going to be years when the use of fund balance and the commitment to capital are both substantially higher than average. We had a year like that last year because we had the opportunity to have a year like that from a larger than expected surplus the year before. This year we don't have as much money in the unassigned fund balance, so we're not able to responsibly commit as much of it to capital investment.
And I think part of it, from the decision point of view, is, and I don't know if it was last year or the year before, we used some of the money because of the police fire facility project, and we wanted to even out what people were paying for taxes as opposed to this. So there's not an exact science to it, but what we've taken as our philosophy is let's try to keep the taxes from, spiking, but let's make it so it's a little bit easier on the taxpayer. So that's sort of how we've worked it the last few years. I don't know if anybody else has a thing. Yes, Mr. Carville.
They'll shoot this down, but I'd like to hear why. I understand that it's a good idea to have a surplus. You used it wisely and I think necessary during Irene. There was a risk. Irene was there, that was a risk, and we spent some money to address that risk. What would be wrong with flipping that around for the fire truck and essentially borrowing the money from ourselves, use the surplus to buy the fire truck, and then replace that surplus over 3 to 5 years? And then if there's another Irene or something, then bond for that.
Right. And that you've just answered the question, because the truck, we can, if we if you decide that we'll proceed and make this purchase in the manner that's recommended, it's a thoughtful, planned, duly considered act that the way we're going to make this happen is by borrowing, and so we can go out in an orderly manner to borrow those funds and make the purchase. And the reason that you maintain a 10% standard for the fund balance is so that when the unexpected happens and you have a great need, like Irene, that you have cash on hand to be able to get out and do the work that needs to be done that you couldn't have planned for. And if you have to go borrow money at that time, you're not borrowing in an orderly manner, you're not having any idea of, what the market's going to be at any given time, whether you're getting the best rates, you're just at the mercy of, collecting that capital as fast as you can so that you can provide the emergency services that are required. And so communities that didn't have a fund balance when Irene happened learned a painful lesson that it was harder for them to get back on their feet and functional again.
Ms. Boone?
If I understand it, then you feel that the taxpayers think it's a good idea to spend an extra $67,000 or $68,000 to be able to smooth out the tax rate.
I think when we made this decision, we thought it was better to keep a steady tax rate as opposed to making it an 8-cent increase this year.
Yeah, well, that seems like what I'm saying in different words. But still, you didn't really answer the question of why last year, knowing that the fire truck was coming up this year, you returned all of that fund balance and are now borrowing. What would have happened if you would have told us last year, we will return this 1.1 million, but next year we are going to take out a $500,000 loan?
It wasn't returned. The vast majority of it was transferred to capital and invested in other necessary purchases and projects, equipment and projects.
But that comes out of the regular budget. I feel that it's just not, it just seems very clear to me that there was $1.1 million in surplus that was used, and I believe you told us that it was to smooth out, to reduce the tax rate, and now we are borrowing. The other point is, in 2 years, we have $1 million loan for a bridge, and the year after, a $2 million, well, not a loan, expense, and the next year, a $2 million expense for the DPW building up there. I think we need to know to understand financial planning and to understand the debt. We need to know, in order to understand our debt and be able to make decisions on debt, we need the same 5-year debt forecast, which you should be able to provide, so we know what it'll be in 2023.
And that appears in the long-term financial plan, which was reviewed by the select board in October and utilized by the select board in making this, not just this decision, but the set of decisions that are before you in the proposed budget.
Are there any more questions on the fire truck? And Dora is getting impatient, so Mr. S.
Not that often that I agree with Dora, but we really should save big discussions until the 24th.
It seems like a big discussion to me, and I'm sorry, Dora, we both met just an hour ago. if someone, this is a two-part, basically a two-part article, and I don't understand how to vote on the two parts. In that if violating this 10% rule, wherever that comes from, isn't part of this, I don't know why that's part of the discussion at all. And second, what if one wanted to vote yes for the fire truck, which I do want, but not borrow 500,000, but borrow 200,000 by using the 300,000 that will eventually be able to go into the reserve fund and bring it back to this 10% level.
So your question is if you wanted to vote to borrow less money?
Yes.
The problem, in our town attorney is here, but the problem is it's an Australian ballot, and the ballot's going to say yes or no to borrowing $500,000. So we can't change the borrowing figure.
If you want to buy the truck this year, and so in the discussion you have at town meeting, you should be, before you, in the discussion you have about the fire truck, you should be clear with each other about whether there's a consensus forming around buying it and buying it in the manner it's been recommended, or whether you wish to buy it all with cash. And if you wish to buy it all with cash, whether you wish to proceed with that this year with a higher tax rate increase in the manner that Mr. Agave's proposed, or whether you wish to defeat Article 11 regarding the borrowing and approve Article 12 regarding the use of fund balance so that we save up. We could reallocate the $50,000 from last year. You could explicitly allocate the $450,000 from this year. There'd be $500,000 towards the purchase of the truck, and the hope would be that there would be enough cash next year to finish that, saving up for that, and be able to buy the truck next year with cash.
Thank you. Thank you. So basically, you have two choices: buy the fire truck with the borrowing, don't buy the fire truck.
Yeah, I want to make clear that you have other alternatives available to you, but we would very strongly urge that you not use more of the fund balance for this in order to be able to buy it with cash this year and take us well below the 10%. That would not be prudent, and we would very strongly recommend that you don't authorize that. But it's an option available to you. And another option available to you is to just defeat both measures and kick the can. And given the importance of the vehicle and the condition of the current vehicle, we think that'd be a mistake.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions about the fire truck, or are we ready to move on? Move on. Okay, the next one should be hopefully an easy one. The skate park, Article 13, which is on page 7. We're recommending that $20,000 from the unassigned fund balance or the surplus be made as a contribution to the skate park fund. And I'm going to turn it over to...
If there's any questions.
Okay. And does anyone have any questions about why we're making that recommendation? Good. Next up, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was in a rush.
Peter Valley in District 3. John, Liz in our caucus mentioned a possible matching fund proposal that the skate park committee is working on. I'm wondering, can you identify who that is being addressed? Maybe Liz, you can answer that for us.
Elizabeth McLaughlin, District 3. The Tarrant Fund is giving us a grant in May, and it's a matching grant. And our hope is that through your generosity at town meeting, and then this future grant that is matched will really be close to, with rigorous fundraising, get the skate park built.
Excellent. Peter, did that answer your?
It did.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Article 18, which is on page 8, and that's the Human Services budget. And as I mentioned earlier, the ask for that is $146,000. Last year it was $120,000. The select board is not involved in allocating those funds. There's a town meeting human services committee. That's a group of people from who are town meeting reps who get together, and they actually have a vetting process where people have to apply for the money, really make their case. They spent a lot of time working on this, and you'll see, you'll see in Article 18 the list. So we are at this point, they're going to be at town meeting, and they can answer any further questions about how they picked, who they picked, and what the money was. So they're really the people to address your questions to. So, yeah. I just want to go through the money ones. We're almost done the money ones, then we're going to go through the other ones. The last thing I want to talk about before we do what John says, and we can go through the other articles, is, and somebody addressed it, I think it was, I don't know if it was Terry or somebody else, maybe it wasn't you, I can't remember. Address the snow plow, sidewalk plow. You'll note that the sidewalk plow is not in our recommended budget. And there was much discussion on the sidewalk plow. The purchase of the plow itself is $140,000. There would be $10,000 worth of labor to operate it. Purchasing the sidewalk plow would add 1.22 cents to the tax rate. So the select board, I don't want to say kick the can, but what we decided to do is let town meeting decide whether the snow plow was necessary to the tune of adding 1.22 cents to the budget. I know the feeling, I don't know if Steve Barrett, probably not now's the time, but if you have any questions for him, but I think Public Works was not advocating for the purchase of the sidewalk plow. I know that they want a lot of equipment, always, Steve, but what their argument, they know that there's a great deal of pressure on the capital budget, so Public Works is recommending that that the sidewalk plow is not purchased because of other pressures on the budget. I don't know if any, but that's up to town. That's what we ultimately decided, was because it would add 1.22 cents to the budget. It's not in the budget that you have, all these papers, nowhere is the $140,000 for the purchase. So if you approved, what article is it? Article 20. If you approved Article 23, it would have to be added into the budget, if that makes sense to everybody. Oh yeah, that's right. The town manager just reminded me, we're not recommending against doing the purchase. It was proposed, it actually came through a group through traffic safety, from the community. So the select board is not saying don't do it, nor staff. But I think the discussion at the select board meeting was for us not to put it in because there is a lot of pressure on the budget. But that doesn't mean we're recommending against it, if that makes sense. Do you know what I'm saying? I think we wanted to leave it up to town meeting.
But it sounds like Steve Barrett does not feel it's a priority.
Well, I think that if Steve can speak for himself, I think the discussion at the town meeting, or the select board meeting was, there was it was the same day, I think, as the fire truck discussion.
It was. Where I was coming from is it wasn't on my list
of pieces of equipment to add to the capital purchase. There's a lot of purchases. We understand the ladder trucks, it's a big nut to crack. There's been a lot of people and a lot of support for an extra sidewalk tractor. Of course, I would love another sidewalk tractor. It would help us be more efficient as far as getting all the sidewalks in town. The current sidewalk tractor, sometimes it takes up to 2 weeks to get all the sidewalks. So a lot of people walk. We hear there's a lot of people in favor of adding this service. But what my feeling at the time when we were up against the ladder truck, the priority in my eyes was the ladder truck. But I certainly would support it. It is certainly a benefit to all the people that walk. It would help them. It would also help us get the sidewalks done in a more timely manner.
And I want to clarify one thing, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Steve. If we purchase this sidewalk plow, so there'll be 2, there aren't going to be any more, the number or miles of sidewalks that are going to be plowed will not increase. It's only going to be more efficient plowing the sidewalks that are currently being plowed.
That's a proposed plan, but over the years, what has happened, originally, we had 18 miles of sidewalk, we had 3 sidewalk tractors. We cut that down by 5 miles, down to 13. And over the years, the board has the authority, only the board, to add additional mileage or streets onto the plow route. Within those years, we've added about another 1.5 miles. So, it is an additional service. I can see, we do hear people requesting additional sidewalks, but the plan right now is to keep it the same to be more efficient.
Does anyone have any questions about the sidewalk plow? Yes, Chris Chapman.
No, you can't ride on the sidewalk.
Rats! How did you know I was going to ask that? Yeah, actually, this is a question about the spending out of the surplus, the so-called surplus. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the 10% not a rule, but something that is followed by the select board and the town manager, because that's an advised amount by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, and I wonder if it would be helpful if one of you folks would explain that and help us with some perspective on the dynamic of dipping further down or adding to that surplus.
It is correct that it is a guideline. It's not a rule. There's no statute or provision in town charter or ordinance that requires that we maintain 10%. That's why, under certain unique circumstances like this year with the truck, the fire truck, and the recommendations before you, we actually have the latitude to go a little below if we feel like there's a proper, prudent, strategic reason to do that. The best practice is 10% would be the bare minimum. It's not uncommon for communities to adopt this same sort of guideline and have that be 25%. And it ranges all over the place for different communities with different sensibilities and different financial wherewithal. But anything less than 10, you're talking about 10% is 1.2 months of operating revenue. It's doesn't get you very far if something like Irene happens. It's would be great if we even could have more set aside. I don't think we can afford that. We've got great infrastructure needs in the community, and we've got a fleet that has some good solid recent purchases in it and some very old equipment in it. So we do the best we can to balance that, and I wouldn't ever recommend, well, I shouldn't say ever, wouldn't recommend any time in the foreseeable future that we raise the guideline to higher than 10%, but going anywhere substantially lower than that really puts the community at risk.
Yes, Mr. Wheelock.
Marshall Wheelock, District 2. Would you help me by explaining that it's probably a myth, but I always understood people who own property in town were responsible for cleaning the sidewalks that abut their, or run across their property. Is that true, that there is an ordinance?
Only in the downtown areas that required by ordinance. I believe there was a time when the ordinance required it more broadly in town, but that was changed a long, long time ago. More recently, select boards have given some consideration during the last decade to possibly instituting a broader requirement, and each time that's come up, the decision has been to not do that.
Yes, Mr. Allen.
Peter Guy, District 3. Peter, I wondered, I'm interested in the reality that the majority of these property taxes are paid by residential property owners as opposed to commercial. And I wondered if we could get some data on what that breakdown is between commercial and residential, and maybe some background in previous years, so we get sort of an idea of over maybe a 5-year period or some kind of period of time we could see, is that improving? Is that ratio improving? So that at one time I think it was way up in the upper 80%. So if that could be part of the presentation, it would be helpful on Saturday.
Good. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions about any of the other articles that we're going to be talking about on Saturday? Dora?
If anybody want to go home.
Yeah, oh yeah, anything else you want to ask? But Dora, it has to be a question.
And it is going to be a question, and I just want to clarify, I wasn't getting impatient. I get frustrated because the citizens have the right to have the full body discuss and argue all of these issues in the full town meeting. And when you do it here, it undermines that process, and then we don't get full democracy. And there's a reason why we have representatives in town meeting, so that's my issue. So the solid waste, I'm not seeing anywhere in here. Tonnages, do we have that anywhere in this book? Because I looked through and I didn't find it. So can we get tonnages for trash, or recycling?
Yes.
Or compost?
Yes, we have those. You're right, it's not here because as a general fund matter, it's a transfer of a sum of money over into the solid waste program. In the solid waste review that we do annually, we show multi-year progress that we've made as a community in terms of directing huge amounts from the garbage waste stream into the, particularly the compost waste stream, but also increase in recycling. We have that data. It's not here. If the body would like that for the meeting, we're happy to provide that along with the other things that you've asked for.
Does anyone else have any questions about anything else that's on the town meeting agenda? Yes, Mr. Esty.
Just a general fun question.
You can ask any question you want.
But you have to form it in a question.
Can you tell me why, I have 2 questions. Can you tell me why all the human service applicants are not described in this yellow book?
They are actually.
All of them? Okay, thank you. Second question, I'm ready.
All right, let us find it for you. We've all... Page, as we were told, 6.
Oh, there you go, 64, right away.
Yeah, page
Right, but
64.
I don't see all of the people, all the line items have a paragraph. And maybe I missed that.
Are you looking...
So,
Are you looking for the dollar amount?
Dollar amounts?
no, that's on page 13.
Are you looking for...
Page 13 has
I don't know how many, looks like, maybe 20. There's not 20 paragraphs on page 64 that says what all of the, right, I'm saying, there's not a paragraph for every one of them.
Not all the groups that are listed are requesting funding for this year, so there will be
Of
more
the ones
than
that
there
are-
are listed.
Of the ones that are listed requesting funding this year, not all of them have a paragraph slide.
Yeah,
I don't think, and I could be wrong. Well, but that's a question. If they're there, they're there. If they're not, they're not.
Right, but they're saying, yeah, there are 26 summaries. Oh, we'll figure this one out.
Next question is related to regulated utility rates for 30 years, and the devil's in the details. And I notice that there are 5 different line items for tree and lawn care, $34,000. There are 11 different line items totaling $22,000 for postage. And there are 13 line items for office supplies. I don't know if, are they bought collectively or does each department buy their own? And my last question is, outstanding number of all of these is the skate rink spends $11,500 on office supplies. The next closest one is the fire department at $10,500, and everyone else is a nice round number, much less than those. So what is the skate rink spending $11,500 on office supplies?
You're asking about the skating rink.
I'm asking why they're bought collectively, why are they listed separately? And particularly, outstanding figure 4 times more than averages for office supplies at the skate rink.
Does Carol want to answer that question? Or one of the questions is, does everybody buy their office supplies together, or they do it by department? And second, why is the skate park or the skating rink spending so much?
So the answer to the first part is it's group pricing. So there's a contract awarded for the different departments of the town to buy off of the larger scale contract throughout the year when they have needs for products. Another part of the answer is that office supplies is a place that we catch some miscellaneous expenses, some things that are not, pencils and pens and printer cartridges and paper. And I suspect that when we hear from Carol, that's going to be part of the answer because of the rink being a place where we have, not so much an office, but a need for other supplies. I don't know the answer, so Carol?
I'm assuming that you're talking about operating supplies on page 93, is that what you're referencing? Yeah, that's not office supplies, that's operating supplies for the operational of the rink. Our office supplies for the Rec and Parks Department is under...
Wait a minute.
I have that problem sometimes too.
Oh, look. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And just to speak to the human service question, you'll have your colleagues in the body 10 days from now able to address you about what they vetted and the recommendation they're making, and that'll be more useful. But there are 26 summaries, and there are 26 agencies recommended to receive funding. I can't tell you at a glance that they all match up, but it seems like there probably is a description for each one. You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions about anything else? Dora?
Dora Bubelik, District 3. I just realized that I want to add a clarifying question to what I was talking about because I may have another question and I want you to be able to answer it. The question would be, when are those tonnages taken?
Okay.
Does anyone else have any other questions about anything that we're going to be talking about at town meeting? All right, seeing none, David Scholes would like to make an announcement.
The school district meeting is going to be next Wednesday. It's going to be at Oak Grove School because over the years we've had people request that we not always have it at the same school so they can come and see what the other schools are like. So we'll be in the gym at Academy School next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thank you. I'm glad to see you're all paying attention. I also want to apologize for being late. I was at a school board meeting which executive session went after 7 p.m. So I wasn't just out getting coffee. So Oak Grove at 7 p.m. next Wednesday.
Yeah. And as a reminder, the caucuses, like as you did tonight, are at 6:30 at Oak Grove. So if you know anybody who wants to be a town meeting rep, it's the perfect time to have them come. And if they are a parent, remind them that there's going to be childcare at town meeting. And just a reminder for all of you who hopefully won't forget what town meeting is, Saturday, the 24th, beginning at 8:30, up at Brattleboro area middle school multi-purpose room. So thank you all for coming tonight, and we'll see you all next couple weeks, a week and a half.